Welcome back to the Tavern. I am stoked about this next guest. I've known him for 25 years. He actually helped me pass that bill in the Texas legislature all those years ago to stop the cities from suing gun manufacturers. And we got reconnected a few years ago. He's continued to be one of the most important voices in America. And unfortunately, one of the most hated guys by the left. But that's a badge of honor around here in the Tavern. John Lott, Professor, good to see you, brother.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate your time.
I love your background. So you're in Montana right now, beautiful flag in the background.
Right.
I know you travel all over the country and speak and influence, but your crime research is so important for people to know about. So I wish this was 3 hours and we could cover a lot of different topics. I don't know where we're going to go, but I want to start with just what you're doing right now and getting the truth out to people. You have to constantly dispel headlines and lies about gun use in America and around the world, crime stats. I mean, how do you pick which battle to engage in with so many lies out there?
It's pretty hard. You have the federal government spending $100 million a year on public health research on guns. You have states like California spending $10 million, and other states from Hawaii to New Mexico to Washington State to Massachusetts and others in between, spending millions of dollars on this. You have Bloomberg spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars each year financing research on gun control issues, as well as the hundreds of millions he spends on other aspects of the debate. So, it's kind of like an avalanche of stuff going out there. And the media has a real impact on people's views, too. 20 years ago, places like the New York Times and Washington Post would at least talk to people on both sides of the issue. It was still kind of in their reporter DNA, even if they weren't fair to both sides. They would at least try to reach out sometimes to both sides. They don't do that anymore. People who watch MSNBC or CNN get one view. Fox is probably more balanced, but it has a real impact.
Well, and I would think too, the money you're talking about that the states and the federal government and everything is spending, just like with the media, they go in with a bias, just like Bloomberg. Because all of these groups that are spending this money they want the outcome to be it's the gun's fault or the presence of the gun.
Sure. Well, there are two things that are going on. One is they have a general idea what different people's views are. So we've done a survey of researchers in economics, criminology, and public health. Economists and criminologists tend to be fairly skeptical of gun control. Public health people tend to be much more supportive of it. So where does all the money go? It goes to public health. But even within public health, politicians aren't stupid. They go and they give money to people who are going to support the things that they want to have supported. And so, it makes a big difference. Unfortunately, even during the Trump administration, you had the political appointees there were basically George Bush appointees. Trump, as an olive branch, let George W. Bush appoint the people at the Department of Justice, and he let Jeb Bush appoint the people at the Department of Education. The political appointees hated Trump. And one of the reasons they brought me into the Trump administration, in part because the political appointee, for example, who's running the Department of, the National Institute of Justice, was giving 45% more money for firearms research than the Obama administration had given out, but every single dollar was going towards gun control advocates. And so, it's been a disaster all the way around. And the thing is, the research is very poorly done. I could tell you lots of stories about it. And it's not just academia and the media. You have, even the civil service. I could tell you war stories from working in the Department of Justice up until January 2021, where I worked in the federal government in the 1980s. At that time, if you found errors in the data, people would fix them. They may disagree with you politically, but we all wanted to get the data right. You do that now, and it's just fighting a pitched battle to go and get what are obvious errors in the data corrected.
Yeah, that love of truth and actually getting the data right. I mean, that's not just in what you're talking about here. It's the COVID response. It's all of those things. The outcome is all that matters to them. Getting the policy that they want and the willingness to not only ignore the mistakes but purposely lie, I think is rampant in all of this. But you just told me something that it makes me realize I was wrong on one of the reasons. I was thinking one of the reasons that the other side dominates this so much is our side's less likely to spend money on these kind of things, that it's harder to get conservatives. Of course, we don't want to spend taxpayer money on anything that is not justified in the Constitution as it is, but it sounds like the Trump administration spent even more on this kind of research than the previous administration.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. And they basically made sure that all of it went to one side of the debate. But it's basically because the person that was put in charge of that really hated Trump. And even if he was more similar in terms of the final views on gun control, he wanted even the Trump administration Department of Justice to go and say that Trump was wrong on things like gun control issues. And so he supported research there.
We could do a whole show on all the people that Trump put in his administration that undermined everything that he did. And that may be what you were about to say, but I don't understand why you would put people in that position. I'm sorry I cut you off there. Go ahead.
Well, he put people in there, as I understood it, as an olive branch to the Bush people. But as far as I can tell, he didn't buy any goodwill from the Bush
people. That didn't pay off. Yeah, that didn't pay off at all.
I mean, Bush was very happy that Trump got defeated. George W. Bush did. You may remember, kind of at Biden's inauguration. I'm trying to remember the congressman from South Carolina who Bush went up to and thanked him, James Clyburn.
Clyburn, yep.
And George W. Bush at Biden's inauguration went up to Clyburn and basically told him, "You've saved the nation," by helping Biden win and helping defeat Trump. So unfortunately, there was a lot of people that Bush and his people got put into the Department of Justice who had very similar views. I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's the difference between Biden and Trump. Whatever you think about Trump's, demeanor or other things, there's a huge difference. I mean, it's massive difference in policy there. I mean, I much would have rather have had Trump replace Breyer with somebody like Gorsuch or Amy Coney Barrett or Kavanaugh than with Justice Jackson that's there. So it's just, I mean, it's not even a close call.
No, and all the demeanor stuff and the personality. I mean, I've always thought, listen, Trump's our Churchill. Churchill was rude, crude, and socially unacceptable too, and he saved the country and half the world as a result. So, okay, let's go to some of the big, I guess, just perceptions and you could drive way down deep into the data, but just in general, the left and the gun control folks, they typically make arguments like, America. Because we have so many guns, we lead the world in gun deaths, and you of course have shown the other nations and of course separate out suicides and all the things that matter to make this data. But just generally, how do you answer people when they bring that up and they say, "Oh, it's because of America having so many guns, and that's why we have more gun deaths than anybody else"?
Right. Well, I mean, the United States has less than the average and less than the median number per capita homicides compared to the rest of the world. People don't kind of understand how a lot of the data is put together. So, for example, we're relatively high in terms of firearm homicides compared to other countries, but that's simply a fact that only about half the countries in the world report firearm homicide data, and the countries that don't report firearm homicide data are the countries that tend to have the highest homicide rates. We get spoiled here in the United States because we have such amazingly detailed data about every little tiny thing. Most other countries don't even separate out murders and homicides. I think most people probably think murders and homicides are the same, but homicides are murders plus justifiable homicides. The United States has a fairly high rate of justifiable homicides, both by police and by civilians. And so, you were to separate that out, that by itself would lower our ranking in terms of just overall homicides, even though we're already below the mean and the average, median and the average there. But look,
well, even what you just said, by the way, I'm sorry I keep interrupting you, but the words mean things, as Rush Limbaugh used to say that all the time, and just defining between murder and homicide, or even like I always stop people when they say a mass shooting. I say, no, that's what happens when I go to the range. It's mass murder or gun murder versus gun violence. And whenever you actually use a gun to stop someone, you're using a gun violence to stop them from murdering someone else. And so the way we use those words really does matter. And the distinction that you just gave is so important. And what I heard you say is that a lot of these countries, there is no distinction. They throw it all into one category, or they don't even keep categories, and they don't keep the data at all.
Right. So, you just bring up the term mass shootings. So there's a lot of different terms out there. There's like mass shootings, there's mass public shootings, there are active shooting type cases, and even some of those are defined differently by different groups. So the FBI traditionally has defined mass shootings as 4 or more people killed, in a shooting. They've looked at things like active shootings, which are shootings that occur in a public place, not part of some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf. And it involves anything from one person being shot at and missed all the way up to a mass public shooting where you can have many people killed. The reason why they define it that way is they want to get at the types of things that get people's attention. What gets on the news is when somebody goes into a mall or a movie theater or a school where the whole point of the attack is simply to go and kill people. And you have other definitions out there, like this gun control group called the Gun Violence Archive, which is what the media refers to all the time when they say there have been 500 mass shootings this year. What they do is 3 or more people shot, could be wounded and or killed. And about 80% of their cases involve drug gang fights over drug turf. Most of the rest are things like robberies. Now, are gang fights over drug turf important? Yeah, anytime anybody gets killed, that's important. But the point is that one reason why the FBI kind of singles out public places and in cases where it doesn't involve some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf, is they're trying to get at the types of instances that get the media attention that are out there. And so, and the point is that the causes and solutions for these, the Gun Violence Archive, including, drug fights and things like that, are very different than the causes and solutions for how you're going to stop a mass public shooting. And so, but, the media or President Biden or others will go and mention, Uvalde, and then they'll say there have been 500 of these. And so they make people think that there's all these types of shootings that are occurring when, in fact, they're very different in terms of the causes and solutions for them.
Well, and let's talk about solutions, because what the left always comes back to is just get rid of the guns. If we just wouldn't allow people to get guns, this stuff wouldn't happen. Versus what, we would argue is, of course, the more armed citizens you have that are, trained good guys and gals with guns, the quicker you can stop the crazy person, and no law is going to stop the crazy person. You need a sheepdog there on site to be able to stop that person. Talk a little bit about that. Like, how do you refute people when they say to you, well, if we just didn't allow for ARs or whatever, high capacity magazines, which of course.
Well, you bring up a lot of points here. You bring up a lot of points. Just take the first points that you're referring to, and that is, about 94% of these mass public shootings occur in places where guns are banned. I think the whole debate that we have right now would be dramatically different if the media would just report what's in a lot of these murders, manifestos, and diaries. So you take the Nashville Covenant school shooter from earlier this year. we've only had a few pages of the diary release that they had. Obviously,
Right.
they were a racist and whatever. They hated whites and things like that. But one part that hasn't been released yet, the Nashville police chief said that he had gotten a chance to go and look at the diary, and that murderer actually had another target as their first choice. They wanted to go after a mall, but it decided not to go after that because there was armed people there. You allowed concealed carry.
Yeah.
You had guards there, and they were worried that those people would be able to go and stop them. So they went after the school, which wasn't posted, which they didn't think would have anybody there to be able to go and stop them. And, the thing is, there's like no national news coverage on that. That occurred.
Yeah.
You just won't see it.
And that's common, right? I mean, that's common. We've got story after
you
story
see it
of
on our website at crimeresearch.org. We go through these things. So you look at the Buffalo mass murder from last year. He's very explicit. He spends a great deal of time talking about why he picked the target that he did. And right up there at the top was he wanted to go to a place where he didn't think his victims would be able to have guns to be able to go and protect themselves. These guys may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. Their goal is to get media coverage. And they know the more people they kill, the more media coverage that they're going to be able to go and get. And they know if they go to a place where their victims aren't going to be able to go and defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people. And the thing is, you take something like the Nashville shooter again. In Tennessee, it's a 6-year prison term if you violate these school gun-free zones that are there. For you or I, 6 years would completely change our lives. Being a felon like that and being locked up for 6 years, our careers would be destroyed. Our families would be destroyed. It would be a huge penalty. It'd be a massive penalty for us. But let's say you're the murderer there. And let's say the murderer had lived, they died, but they killed 6 people. They murdered 6 people. They're going to be facing either 6 life sentences or 6 death penalties. Is the notion that if they're going to say, well, I can live with these 6 life sentences, but you add another 6 years onto it, and that just will be too much. I just can't. Right. I can't. Right. The additional 6 years will just be too much for me. In Maine, we just had this a shooter in Lewiston. The bowling alley was posted banning people being able to carry concealed handguns. In Maine, those signs are kind of enforced by law. Like maybe a 2-year prison term for violating it. Again, that's a real penalty. But you kill lots of people there. Going to be facing lots of life sentences. Is the notion that adding a couple more years is really going to be a penalty? No, it's not a penalty. It's not a marginal deterrence for them.
And common sense tells us that sign or that law preventing a firearm on a campus or preventing you from carrying in wherever the location is never going to stop a murderer from coming in and killing people, but it does stop law-abiding citizens from because of what you just said, too. It's like, well, I want to protect my family, but I don't want to risk 2 years or 6 years or whatever. Now, my choice is always just not to go to places that don't let me carry. But for a lot of people, they're like, well, I'll just leave it in the car. I mean, even our mutual friend, Susanna Hupp, that's how she, her parents were killed at that Luby's and her gun was in the car because back then you couldn't carry in Texas. And she became a legislator over it and a champion for this. So it does have an effect. Gun-free zones has an effect, the wrong effect. It actually allows for more murder. And I just don't even understand.
Serves as a magnet to go and attract people to those places. Yeah. I mean, anybody who's read the diaries and manifestos know that these people pay attention to these things.
Yeah, I don't understand why parents don't. The outcry, you hear these emotional pleas from parents that have lost their kids in situations like this, and it's always emotional pleas to do something, and the something they want done that doesn't actually do anything. It's either more signs or more laws against the gun. I just don't understand why their passion and their pleas are not around the fact that why didn't you have someone armed and prepared to defend my child when they were at that school? Why didn't you have laws that made it easier for me to defend my family? I just can't figure out the disconnect, and I'm assuming it's just, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, it's ignorance. It's just not knowing. They don't know the things that you and I know.
I don't blame
and
people.
Talk about.
I don't blame most people, because most people get their information from the news media.
Right.
And the problem that you face is that, in 2021, we did a really deep dive on media coverage on defensive gun uses. And, there are a couple thousand stories that you'll find in all the media. But let's say you take the top 5 largest newspapers in the United States, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, New York Times, the LA Times, the Washington Post. Between those 5 newspapers, they had a total of over 2,700 gun crime stories. At the same time, they had only 10 defensive gun use stories, and most of those had something go wrong. And, the best information we have, I think, indicates that the reverse is true, that people use guns defensively about 5 times more frequently each year to stop crime than they use them to commit crime. But I'll give you one example. So you look at these over 2,000 defensive gun use stories. About over half of those involve instances where the attacker was killed in the defensive gun use. About 44% of them involve instances where the attacker was wounded. And only about 4% of them involve instances where the attack was stopped simply by brandishing the gun. And most of those involved cases where the attacker was held at gunpoint until the police arrived. Now, here's the problem. It looks like from the research out there that, in fact, about 95% of defensive gun uses simply involve brandishing. Now, why the difference? Why is only 4% of the news stories will cover those types of cases, but we think 95% of them actually do? And that is, there's a big difference between what's newsworthy and what actually happens out in the world. So if you are an editor of a news bureau and you have 2 stories that come across your desk, in one case, there's a dead body on the ground. In another case, let's say a woman's brandished a gun, the would-be attackers run away, no shots are fired, no dead body on the ground. You're not even sure what crime would have been committed if the person hadn't been able to defend themselves. What story are you going to run with? I think anybody, I know I would, be much more likely to run with the dead body on the ground than on the case where I can't even say for sure what crime would have been committed. Now, while we can understand from a newsworthiness perspective, from a policy perspective, we care about both cases. What saves the most lives? What protects people? Not just what is going to get the most clicks in terms of news coverage that's there. And so, you could be a regular voracious reader of the news. You could watch CNN and MSNBC religiously. And you may never even hear about any defensive gun use stories over the year. And if you do, something probably went wrong on it. And yet you hear thousands of news stories about bad things that happen with guns. Is it very surprising then that people come away with the notion, well, if I can just get rid of guns, then bad things won't happen? And, you take a few things for example, only about a quarter of violent crimes are reported to police. Okay, and only a tiny fraction of those get news coverage. So it's not too surprising that defensive gun use stories. There's no way for them to even know that something happened, and so there are lots of explanations to go out there, but it's still people don't understand kind of how the information that they get is filtered, and how that gives them a real misimpression about how the way the world works.
John, I want to do this several times while we're talking, but your website and how people can both get the information, get on your emails. I love reading your emails, and it summarizes so much of what you've done over the week before and different things, but also what's in the news and new research that you have coming out. So how to get on your email list, how to tap the information at the website, and then how to donate, because that's how you fund all of this research is individual donations. And so us helping you, those that are watching out there, is a big part of how we get the truth. So tell us a little bit about that too.
Well, thanks very much. Yeah, well, our website is crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. And as you say, people can sign up for our emails. We send out one email once every 2 weeks to people. And I appreciate the call out. We don't take any money from anybody in the any gun companies or anybody in the industry or any groups like the NRA or whatever, I get asked all the time by the media whether I get funding from different groups. And I want to be able to tell them, no, we don't do that. I mean, there's a real double standard out there. It's not like people get asked, do you get money from Michael Bloomberg or whatever? They don't really care. They don't view that as a bias. And, but
it's double punishment for you. You're intellectually honest, and as a result, it's harder to raise money. It's like, it's a catch-22. That's why people watching it's so important for you to give because of how John's doing this. I mean, Professor, you're head and shoulders above the rest on being intellectually honest. They manipulate the data. They get the money from the people that want those things, and that's why we like promoting what you're doing and encouraging people to support. I'm curious how legislators respond. When you talk to them now, I mean, of course, that's how we originally met when I was in the legislature, but they should be more informed, right? They should be more willing to dive into the data, but they obviously come in with their biases and their constituencies and all of that. But you testify in state legislatures all the time, and you advise and bring this data to them. Can you make me feel a little better about all this by acknowledging whether or not they're at least a little more willing to dig to the truth since they're actually making a law on these things?
Well, I think it's changed over time. I think they were more willing 20 years ago than they are now on this type of stuff. I testified before 12 state legislatures this year, and it's gotten really weird. So when I testified in Oregon, the two Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee had invited me to testify. The date was changed, so I had to drive out there rather than fly. And I'm almost there late on Sunday night. And I get a call from one of the Republicans who invited me, and they said, well, the Democratic chair of the committee says that you can't qualify as our expert on there. And the Democrats ended up picking the expert to represent the Republican viewpoint. They wouldn't let the Republicans do that.
And wait, John, I got to interrupt you again because a lot of our listeners may not know. I mean, you've been a professor at Wharton, at let's see, I forget all of Yale, UCLA. Help me out. I mean, for them to say that you're not an expert, your economic background, I mean, all the data, all the statistics, everything. Just help our listeners that may not be aware why you've got a resume that's a mile long.
Right. Well, I'm a PhD in economics. I've had research and teaching positions at Stanford, University of Chicago, Yale, the Wharton Business School, UCLA, Rice. I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission in Washington, and I was more recently senior advisor for research and statistics in the U.S. Department of Justice.
You would think that would cause you to qualify. I mean, even those are all little backwoods schools compared to the University of Texas, of course. But no kidding. All right, seriously.
Right.
So they literally removed you as did you not get to testify after traveling all the way out there?
Well, they ended up saying I could. So they had two different panels. They had an expert panel, and then they had just the general public that was there, and they let me testify in the general public panel. I was given 2 minutes to do that, but they wouldn't let the Republican senators ask me any questions. And
wow.
And they said, well, we got so many people signed up, we can only give you 2 minutes. So then what happened was a number of the people after me said, look, so as not to increase the total time, we'll give Lott our time to go and speak more, but they wouldn't let him do that. And
this may be a total, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit trail, but you have dealt with this maybe more than anybody I know. I dealt with it on a very small level, even with my local school board, where they've made it so hard for people to give their input. We're reaching this place where they hate civil discourse. We can't actually have the discussion to get to the truth. As Patrick Henry said, according to the magnitude of the subject, ought to be the freedom of the debate. Where does that take us as a culture? And I'm asking you this as someone that's, you look at this stuff from where are we going as a nation and what are the policies that will make us better? If we can't have input, I mean, even if you believe totally different from me, I would want to hear how you got to that conclusion so that if I'm wrong, I can figure that out and it be corrected. I think we're losing that desire to find truth.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is, I had something similar happen in Washington State. They wouldn't let me testify. They wouldn't let even in the public hearing or in the expert, they wouldn't let me testify in the Washington State Senate there, even though the Republican senators there also wanted me to testify. I had something similar happen in Nevada this year. I've never had these types of things happen before. In Nevada, they wouldn't let the Republicans ask me any questions. In Michigan, the state house there, when I testified, the Democratic chair of the committee went on for 7 or 8 minutes after I testified, basically making all sorts of attacks, and then wouldn't let me respond. She let the Republicans ask one question. The Republican asked me if I had any responses to her. And that just completely blew her gasket there. And, so I've never, it's amazing how much it's changed.
It's Marxism. It's Marxism. That's what Marxists do. They silence the opposition. And that's what they're doing in this case.
So, but it's changed in this way too. When you testify before Congress or the Senate, U.S. House or Senate, what normally happens is that Republicans ask Republican witness questions, the Democrats ask Democrat witnesses questions. In state legislatures, it used to be that you'd get more crossover. Republicans would ask the Democrat questions and Democrats would ask the Republicans questions. But, that's even going away. I did testify earlier this year before the Texas House, and they had a special committee set up there to go and look at different types of gun control rules. The speaker there had kind of loaded even the Republicans with kind of the more pro-gun control Republicans that were there, but there were still a couple strong Republicans that you would have agreed with. And I have to say, I did get questions from the Democrats, but the quality of the questions were unbelievably bad. I mean, it was just the vice chair for the panel. I don't remember his name, but he and I got into a debate about whether you should just look at the absolute number of murders or per capita rates when you compare different places. And he wanted to go and argue that when you're looking at mass shootings or something, you should just look at the total numbers. And I was trying to explain to him, you're not going to compare the total number of murders in Texas with Wyoming, right, or someplace like that. You have a lot more people that live here. You're going to want to look at what the per capita rates are. And so, but who knows?
Yeah, as a friend of mine used to say, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And that's probably how you feel a lot when you're testifying. I applaud you for sticking it out and for continuing to go to those places that you know. I mean, when you go to Portland or Washington, Oregon or Washington, you're stepping into the belly of the beast, right? I mean, the likelihood of even passing a piece of legislation is low.
Right. I mean, not to put anything down with your program, and I appreciate you having me on, but I would rather be on shows
changing minds,
where people disagree with me a lot to begin with. I think that it's more fun for me to go and do it, and it's more productive in a sense. But I'm happy to go and talk any place just to help educate people on some of these things. The biggest problem I have is it's just impossible to get people to debate. I was invited out to Tufts University just a couple weeks ago to do a debate. They had this professor at Boston University who had agreed to do the debate. They had set up a date for him that he was able to do it. And then they went around and searched for a debate partner, and they approached me. And I said, sure, I'm happy to do it. And then they went back to him, and apparently he realized at that point that the date that he had given them, he had a conflict with and wasn't able to go and do it. And apparently he was busy the whole fall. So he wasn't able to go and pick another date. And when I go to law schools and do debates at Federal Society, I don't know, the last 40 schools I've been to, they've had like one debate that they've been able to set up. It just, they'll poach lots of people, but basically what happens is the different gun control groups and the different gun control academics all have an agreement among themselves not to debate me. And I think they do it for a couple of reasons. One is you're going to get a larger audience if you have a debate. And two, you're going to get people who have all sorts of different views showing up for that. And and so people will hear arguments that they wouldn't have heard otherwise.
That's right.
I think it's a loss that that's the case. So
it's sad. It's a sad state of affairs. I'm not sure, for a constitutional republic where people need to be able to debate those things and learn and sharpen each other's countenance and, get better. I'm not sure how a republic survives without that. So we need to revive it, and we need to get people to be hungry for truth and want to hear it. I think people are. I think it's the leaders of these movements. They know that their arguments are weak, and they don't want to expose them to somebody like you that's going to bring the data. You've got a lot of books that you've written. What would you say right now for where we are in the nation with all that's going on, of all of your stuff that you've done over the years? If somebody was only going to be able to get one of them right away, what would you recommend?
Well, my most recent book is called Gun Control Myths. It goes through about 45 different myths that people hear constantly in the media about gun control issues. I think that's probably the easiest one. Kind of gives them at least a little bit of an introduction to a lot of different types of claims that are there. And of course, people can go to our website at crimeresearch.org to kind of get the latest studies that we have on different things.
crimeresearch.org. All right, Professor Lott, I'm going to guarantee you right now that when I get the Patriot Academy campus built, I'm going to find some left-wing gun control person that's willing to debate you on site.
I'll be happy to do it.
Texas.
I'll be there. I think you'll find it more difficult than you might think. But anyway, I'd be happy to do it. All right.
If I have to, I'll put on a wig and I'll act like I'm the left. I'll make their arguments for them.
One of the things is, when you go and you teach a class, whatever, you want to provide the strongest arguments on both sides of an issue.
Yeah.
But when you're there, if somebody from the other side's providing the arguments, it's even more convincing. Even if I were to make the same arguments, because people are not sure whether you're providing a straw man or whatever. But
that's right.
If you have somebody who's a gun control advocate making those arguments, then they kind of know that that's the strongest ones that can be made.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor John Lott, thank you for joining me in the Tavern. Look forward to getting you back again soon.
Well, thanks. It's great seeing you. Take care.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.